All right, I am going to start the presentation. We are recording right now. Good morning, everyone. This is the Energy Storage Enhancements Track 2 training. My name is Cynthia Hinman, and I'm going to be leading this session. My producer is Dottie Vance, and she's going to make sure that we catch all of your questions, whether it's you raise your hand or you write a message in the chat area. So we will stop from time to time for questions, and hopefully I will catch them all, but if not, Dottie certainly will be there to remind me. One thing I want to suggest, if you do put questions in the chat, please address them to everyone. If you address them to me privately, I may not see them. Plus, other people don't get the benefit of your question, and I would just read it anyway. So if you want to put a question in the chat, certainly welcome to, but please address it to everyone. I also want to mention I have a number of SMEs on the call, subject matter experts, who are available to help me out if I cannot answer the question. So I really appreciate their time and effort as well. As I mentioned, we are recording this session, and it will be available either later today or tomorrow online. I also made a few small changes to the presentation. I did post it online yesterday in the Learning Center on the release planning page and in the stakeholder page as well. But I've made a few changes, nothing substantial, but I will be reposting this presentation. So let's start with our housekeeping items. As always, when you enter this presentation, you are on mute. But of course, if you have questions, when we have those question and answer periods, you're certainly welcome to raise your hand and unmute yourself to ask those questions. And as I mentioned earlier, you can also write your questions in the chat pod, and we will address them and answer them in that way. And of course, if there are any questions we can't answer, we'll gather them up and we will send those answers out to everybody once we have them. So let's look at what we're covering today. So the Energy Storage Enhancements Track 2 has quite a few goals, actually. There are the co-located model enhancements. There are a couple of those. The first one has to do with providing the aggregate capability constraint for pseudo-tied resources that are co-located. Currently, that exists within RBA, but we're extending it to pseudo-tied resources. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Also, we're adding the option to not charge from the grid for co-located resources. So we're going to go through that and talk about why we're implementing that and how you might participate in that. Second, I have a short RIMS update about some new fields that have been added for us to gather data about these resources. And finally, and what we're probably going to spend the most time on is the state of charge exceptional dispatch. And I have Monique Ah, who's going to participate and provide the examples that she's been providing for you guys in the Market Sim forums. So she'll be going over those, and we'll also talk some more about that settlement. So first, we're going to start with that ACC for the co-located pseudo-tie resources. Let's talk about some definitions first. There's a lot of terminology just even in the title of this part of the training. So I just wanted to cover what each one of these things mean. Probably a refresher for most of you. You already know this, but for those folks who are new to this, we'll talk about first what's a co-located resource. So a co-located resource are separate and independent resources that are at the same generating facility from an interconnection perspective. You see here in this example, we have a solar and a storage resource, and they both have separate resource IDs, separate meters. They're settled separately. They submit outages separately. They submit their bids separately. Okay, so that is what a co-located resource is. They're essentially two resources at the location, and they're identified separately. Next, let's talk about what we mean by an ACC. ACC is an aggregate capability constraint, and this ensures that co-located resources market awards don't exceed the interconnection service capacity at their location. So you can see here we have 4 resources in this configuration for co-located resources, but the ACC in this example is 233 megawatts. So of these 4 resources, they won't be dispatched for more than 233 megawatts. So that's what an ACC does. That's what that constraint is for. So to add to that, we've got now the pseudo-tie. Pseudo-tie, those are resources that are physically located outside of the ISO Balancing Authority, but they're modeled as internal resources. And simply put, we just did not have this ACC availability for resources before. And once this is implemented, pseudo-tie co-located resources will be able to have an ACC. So what's the process for this? Well, of course, let's talk about first the process for what happens with an ACC, just as a refresher again. So every day, the day-ahead and real-time market receive model data for all the active ACCs and their co-located resources. And for each market run, the system does its optimization and economic dispatch, and it's also enforcing the ACC for co-located resources. So as I mentioned before, the combined dispatch for those co-located resources will not exceed the ACC. And one resource at the co-located facility may be producing energy while another one is consuming energy at the same time. The dispatch instructions for all resources are based on the bids. So what is the problem? I already identified that, but we're going to go through that as well. That ACCs that we have ensure that those co-located resources don't exceed that capacity that they have for their site, but we only approve that for internal resources, internal to our BAA. So we needed that for our pseudo-tied resources, so now we're going to allow that. If you're interested in this, what should you do? Well, first of all, of course, you need your PGA to reflect that you have that you want to have that ACC. Additionally, the master file in the resource tab, that co-located column should reflect that you have a co-located resource. So with those two things, you should be able to have an ACC for your pseudo-tied co-located resource. So that's really all I have on this. Is what questions do you have? We'll open it up for questions now. I have some additional resources. Go ahead.
Yep. So I was just looking to see if there's any hands raised, and I don't see any currently, nor do I see any questions in the chat.
Okay, so we'll move on to our next topic. And again, we will come back and ask if you have questions later, so you have other opportunities if something comes up with regard to that. So we're going to move on from the ACC issue to our next topic, which is avoiding charging from the grid, or grid charging as we call it. This is a new optional feature that's available to all storage resources. So first question is, why do customers ask for this? So the investment tax credit strictly limits the tax incentives the developer can receive if it charges a storage resource from source is external to a co-located renewable resource, and many agreements assume ITC recovery, and so they include this requirement to avoid grid charging. We didn't have the availability of this, but we will with the implementation of Energy Storage Enhancements Track 2. We're going to create a charging constraint that co-located resources can use to help avoid
audio on my phone.
I'm sorry, could you, everyone, please mute yourself? Thank you. All right, so how do you do this? Well, we're going to take a look at cyber. So here we have the cyber screen. You can see we're on the bids tab. This happens to be for the day-ahead market, but the real-time market looks the same. We're in the hourly details section, and this SC in this example has selected yes for the off-grid indicator for their resource. The off-grid indicator is used to manage that standalone or sub ACC, and you can see that you can turn it on and off hour by hour, depending on if you want it on or off during certain parts of the day. Additionally, you can turn on this or off this grid flag between day ahead and real time as well, so that this is an hourly biddable parameter. If you don't see this column on your hourly tab, you can go to the Adjust Columns icon and select the off-grid charge indicator in the data grid. You can see it there at the bottom. You can just click it and it will add it to your hourly. So next, let's look at the rug slide that has the API and UI information. So you'll see that that's available. We have a new element in the XSD for the off-grid charge in the API. And in the data comments section, again, there's that yes or no for grid charging. And again, this is optional. I have one more note about this off-grid charging and having to do with OMS. Storage resources will need to submit outage cards in OMS if the co-located VER cannot provide that charging energy. And you don't want to charge from the grid. Additionally, storage resources that have depleted its SOC and there's no ability to charge are also going to need to submit outage cards. So that is the second feature in our Energy Storage Enhancements Track 2. Are there any questions about this feature?
Cindy, I do see one hand raised currently from Drew. So Drew, you can come off mute and ask.
Drew Scow, Fluence Energy. The best understanding I've gotten of this so far suggests that this is not compatible with ancillary services, really. Is that something you can confirm?
I have Wendell Tamblin on the phone, and I think he can probably answer that question. Wendell, do you want to jump on?
Hi, this is Wendell. I don't think there's anything related to AS on this. The off-grid charge is simply an indicator that gets sent to the market for that resource that belongs to a sub-ACC or standalone ACC to set that limit to 0. And it applies to all the resources in the sub or standalone ACC.
So it's Michael Martin. I think to add to that, I think there is a relationship with REG where if you're saying you can't charge off the grid, you're not available for REG. And let me, I have some words on this. Let's continue on, and I can get words to Cindy here. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Alva, I see you have a question. Alva, do you want to unmute?
I had to double unmute. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Absolutely.
So just on the ONS cards, so what's the time frame of the? I mean, is it essentially? Is one simply putting in a card that says, I don't think I'm going to be available for the next hour? I mean, is it just basically because this is an estimate given that the VER continues to, potentially, like, for instance, right now it can't charge because a cloud went over. It's going to be, the cloud's going to be over us for some period, which is based on our assessment of what that might be. Is the expectation that the clearance would strictly cover that interval, or what's sort of the expectation in terms of how the outages that you require track the actual ability to charge from the grid, or the inability to discharge from the battery?
Can one of my SMEs answer that question for Alva?
So
Alva,
it's Michael again. Why don't so I think what I'm pulling up now should provide answer to that question also, with the exception of just the case of where it's an operational outage where you're just unavailable. But give me a sec. I'm pulling up some words for us, and if we can keep going, that'd be great.
Thanks.
All right. I see that Mayhew, there's a question. Can you please unmute yourself? John.
This is John Mayhew from P&M. So the indicator that you go into cyber and you check, once you check it, will it remain that way, or do entities have to go in daily and check this?
Yeah, so I mean, it's part of your bid. So if you're in the day-ahead market and your resource is electing to set the off-grid charge for certain hours of that day in the day-ahead bid, you simply make sure that that indicator is yes for those hours. It applies to the bid. That bid then goes to the market, and the market will apply that limit for those hours that were in the bid that said off-grid charge yes, and then restrict it. So in the real time, you can come back in and you can reset, say it was yes for an hour and 10 in the day ahead. In the real time, you don't have to set that flag, all right? But if you do set that flag, it means you're continuing to off-grid charge in real time for hour and 10. So it will have to come in the bid. We do not auto-fill from the day ahead to the real time. Simply, for that resource that's representing the sub-ACC or the standalone ACC, if you have it set in the day ahead and you want it in the real time, it should come in the real time as well. Or if there's a change, maybe you didn't have it set in the day ahead, but you do need it for the real time. It's per bid. It's the bid that's going to send that indicator to the market for that hour.
Appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I see we have one more question in queue, and then we have some in the chat. So Michael, go ahead, and then we'll go to the chat questions.
This is Michael Volpe from PG&E. Back to the OMS issue. How do you reflect this in OMS, given that there is only one tab, which is the load max for charging, to reflect, the inability to charge? What does that mean in the sense that that could be applied to both inability to charge from the VER or inability to charge from the grid? I mean, there's only one field in OMS, so how does that work?
All right. Michael, can you help with that question?
So I'm multitasking, and I'll be honest, I missed the question.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering about the OMS field of load max being the only field in OMS to reflect restrictions on charging. So what does that mean in terms of if you want to reflect inability to charge from the grid or the VER when there's only one field in OMS?
So the OMS field you're is that the new withdrawal limit that we are discussing now, or is this
no? You know what? We don't have an OMS SME on the call, so the OMS questions perhaps we can send the responses to you on these to the whole group based on these questions, because I don't have my OMS SME on the call. Is that fair? We'll get to the right answers.
Thank you.
All right. I see that I don't see any other hands raised, but I do see that Bo Lou has a question. Is the off-grid charge flag only applied to co-located batteries? Do standalone batteries need to submit a bid with this flag too? First of all, the bid is, this is an optional thing. You do not need to do it at all. A standalone battery, I would assume, would not be grid, not wanting to grid charge because they wouldn't have like that VER resource associated with them. I hope that answers your question. Then, go ahead.
So I do want to also indicate that whichever resources have this flag set in master file, there could be multiple resources in a sub-ACC. Only one of those resources is going to be able to set the flag for the sub-ACC. So not all resources that belong to a sub-ACC will be allowed to submit an off-grid charge. So it's controlled in how the resource is registered in master file and which one is going to represent the sub-ACC or the standalone ACC. So it doesn't apply to all NGRs that are co-located or part of a sub-ACC or standalone ACC. Just want to make sure that's clear.
Thank you, Wendell.
Yes.
Additionally, Alan, I see that your question about nature of work for the OMS cards, again, that's an OMS question, and we will send all those responses regarding OMS. We'll bundle those together and make sure that we get answers for you. So I see Mike, you had a question. Is the off-grid indicator flag required for day-ahead real-time bids? No, that it is optional. Let's see. And then Dottie added the link for the BRS, so that should help you out as well. I see Alba, you have your hand raised again, so could you unmute?
Yeah.
Question.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. This is to follow up on Bo's question. I took it in a different way than what Wendell was saying, which is, there may be constraints on whether you accept the flag, but is that flag value available? Or I think you said it's optional, meaning we can just leave it blank. That's what I'm taking is your answer, Cynthia. But if we were to put in a value there, is it innocuous? It's just like for those of us who don't have co-located batteries, but we're putting in a battery bid, what is how does that field look to us in cyber? Can we set it even though it's not used? Do we need to put a field in the is there an additional field in the API even though we're not co-located? That's kind of the question. I think, Wendell, you answered the question of how it's used perfectly, but what's the impact on standalone batteries is what I took as the question, and that's certainly a question I have.
Alva, is that in regards to bidding?
Yeah, just in terms of what the structure of the bids, or if in other words, is there a field there that we need to be cognizant of in terms of the API, and then if we put some value in there, is it innocuous? Essentially, is the question.
So yes, there is a new element in the XSD that would allow you to specify the off-grid charge. It does not have to be in there, right?
Okay.
It only accepts yes or no, and obviously if it's yes, that's when the withdrawal limit gets set. Even a no you don't have to put a no in. You can just leave it blank. There is a cyber validation rule, so your resource would have to be certified with the flag and to be able to submit this. Like I said, so if it's not, if you put it in there and your resource isn't certified for the off-grid charge, then it would become invalid. So
okay, so that's exactly what I was asking.
Yeah.
Don't put in a yes unless you actually know that you're the resource that's qualified to put in a yes, because it will result in the bid being invalid.
Correct.
And if you don't do anything and you just leave it exactly as using the API as it is, that'll be fine because the field is not actually required in the bids.
That is correct. That's why we did it that way. Yep.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Sure.
All right. I see there is a question about, I have an answer to the question about the AS awards, and thank you, Michael. It says, during hours where the standalone or sub-ACC constraint withdrawal limit equals 0, any battery resources subject to the ACC constraint will not receive reg up or reg down awards in either the day ahead or real-time markets. So there's the answer to that earlier question. Michael, I know you provided a lot of input. Was there anything else that you wanted to add to respond to any of the other questions?
So we do have some draft BPM language. It's in PRR 1526, and it's an additional paragraph on the withdrawal limit.
Okay. All right. I don't see any additional questions here for now. So wait, Drew, please go ahead.
Drew Scufflins. I'm still kind of curious about the compatibility of this and the impact of this on regulation. If you all could, provide some clarity there, that would be really appreciated.
Okay, will do with regard to the off-grid charging. Thank you. All right. I do not see any additional hands, so we will continue on to the next topic, which has to do with RIMs. And within this, the Energy Enhancements Track 2, there are a few fields in RIMs that were added, so we just want to review those with you. As you can see, in the app and study area, we've added for storage resources, the megawatt hours and storage duration hours. Again, and in the NRI projects page, there's the megawatt hours and the PMIN. In your interconnection form, interconnection request form, you can see there's also going to be two fields added, one for energy for storage resources only, and expected hour duration for storage systems only. And then there's also the PDF with those fields that you can fill in as well. So these fields are going to be added so that we can have them available in the future. Here's the RUG slide with some details. It's only talking about the app and study, but the slide previously has the other places where it's going to live. Questions about that?
Cindy, so I'm looking to see if I see any hands raised, and currently I do not see any, and I do not see any questions in the chat as well.
All right, so we're going to move on to the next topic, which has to do with that hold exceptional dispatch, and I believe this will probably take a lot more time, and we have plenty of time to discuss, and that's the counterfactual opportunity cost methodology for the hold SOC exceptional dispatches. We'll start by some background, and then I'm going to hand it over to Monique to go over those examples. We'll follow that with the market sim scenarios. So first, we're going to talk about why we're doing this. So as we know, the ISO may need to issue exceptional dispatches to storage resources to hold their state of charge when we're concerned that real-time price signals may inadvertently drain storage resources and make them less available when we need them the most. So our existing ED settlements, the ones that not the hold state of charge, are based on a bid or better methodology, which doesn't work when we're actually instructing a resource to stay to a zero instruction, right? So what we needed to do was to have a new solution for this hold methodology, is to implement new counterfactual opportunity cost methodology to settle EDs that instruct resources to hold their state of charge. All right, so the next slide is just a sort of a graphic showing what we're talking about. So you can see here, and this actually, I think this was in the filing, or it might be in the BPM, I can't remember now, but in the scenario, the operator initially charges a storage resource because it's going to be needed in the future. And that's going to be covered by that SIS EMR exceptional dispatch, just like it is today. And once that resource is at the desired state of charge, then the operator is going to issue that hold ED, and the settlement will use from that time through the rest of the day. And will be settled using that lost opportunity cost uplift. And then ultimately, and this might be the next day, the market dispatches it back. All right, so let's look at the charge codes associated with this. Oh, I added a tip on here, and that is if a co-located resource receives an ED to charge and hold, off-grid charging will not be observed. From what we had in the last section. I'm sorry, did somebody want to say something?
Yeah. Yes, Michael, you know, I wanted to add one comment about this, which folks might be thinking. This is extremely rare. This type of action, exceptional dispatch, would only be done on, you know, consider the worst day, like last summer, September 6th. You know, where, you know, so this, again, I just wanted to set that expectation that this is not something an operator would do and would usually rely on market dispatches, you know, to charge and discharge batteries. Thanks.
Good point, Michael. And as a matter of fact, I think last year we did this 11 times over the whole year. Or 10 or 11 times, and this year so far we've done it only 10 or 11 times. So good point. All right, so let's take a look at those charge codes. So we've got charge code 6485, which is the exceptional dispatch hold SOC uplift settlement, which is that payment for the hold SOC. The allocation is the two-tiered allocation. that we use for other things as well, which charge code 6486, which is the first tier of the cost allocation based on the total net negative uninstructed imbalance energy. And then 6480 if there is additional allocation that has to take place, and that's going to be based on your measured demand, excluding demand served through transmission rights. Finally, there is a pre-calc that is impacted, and it includes the exceptional dispatch hold state of charge payment in the real-time market, and it's used in the bid cost recovery settlement. I'm going to talk a little bit more about 6485. So as I mentioned before, the hold SOC is a system emergency ED reason type, so that's SysEMR ED. It represents the lost revenue that could have been made if the resource had not been exceptionally dispatched to hold. We want to make sure that you're whole. And upstream calculation of opportunity costs based on hold SOC instruction until the end of the trade date. So if we do have that hold SOC, we're going to start that calculation. We'll show you in the CMRI report where you can see that, and it will go till the end of the day. And this revenue is considered in the real-time bid cost recovery calculation. So let's turn to the counterfactual methodology and get into the details of that. So we're going to have this new counterfactual opportunity cost methodology to account for the maximum revenues the resource would have received if it had participated optimally in the market. Again, to make sure that you're made whole. What we're going to do is for each hold exceptional dispatch, the market will compute these two values. First, it's going to compute the revenue maximizing energy dispatch the resource would have received if there was no hold ED in place. And then it will also calculate the revenue maximizing energy dispatch the resource would have received with that hold ED. The ISO will compare those two values, and if the resource would have made additional revenues if that hold wasn't in place, then there's going to be that uplift payment. And if it would have not received those additional revenues, then there would be no additional uplift. So how do we determine these counterfactuals? The ISO is going to calculate the resource's opportunity cost based on its master file and real-time characteristics. And this includes state of charge limits, real-time, state of charge, and real-time bids. And then the economic dispatches will be determined by comparing the resource's real-time bids with their real-time LMPs. And the bid cost recovery will account for this new type of hold ED compensation. All right, so I think this is the point where I'm going to hand it off to Monique. I'm going to get out of the presentation and hoping Monique is available. Are you there, Monique? Can you unmute yourself?
I am. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you. Let me stop the presentation. I'm going to hand the presenting rights off to you so you can go through your presentation.
All right. Are you able to see my screen? I can give you a moment to adjust. I have an extra large screen. Would it be easier if I put this in the center or keep it left?
I can see it fine the way it is.
Okay.
So just go with that. And please raise your hand if you have concerns or can't see.
All right. So I'm going to walk you through some examples of different ways that this lost opportunity cost uplift is being calculated. My name is Monique. I am part of Power Systems Technology Development Team, and I have been supporting the system that calculates this since its inception in 2008. And I'm really enjoying learning about the batteries and being on the frontier of developing the formulas to help the batteries be competitive on the market. All right, so I'm going to start with a very simple example, and then we're going in example B and C, we're going to get into different kinds of real-time scenarios and that can impact what we're talking about. So in this example, and actually in all three of these examples, we're using a very simple use case where the operator is choosing to charge a resource for a few intervals, and then it's going to hold it. So the way this workbook is set up is this is the real-time bid curve that's going to apply to all of the hours. Down here, I've got hours 12 through the end of the day. The reason why I don't have anything earlier than hour 12 is because the counterfactual calculations don't do anything until the hold ED actually begins. So before hour 12, there's no activity to talk to you about. Sorry, I have a little frog in my throat this morning. Got some water with me. All right, so in these few columns, there's information that's going to apply for the rest of the columns. We've got our hour and the real-time intervals. And now here are our real-time LMPs. These particular examples are not modeling any particular trade date. And I have just created the LMPs that will help create the scenario that I want to explain. In this column, we're going to show what exceptional dispatch is going on if we have a charging ED or a holding ED. Then we have the two different counterfactual calculations. The first one is with the hold ED. Now, some might ask, well, wait, but you issued a hold ED in real time, so why not just go with what actually happened in real time rather than create a counterfactual to account for the dispatch with the hold? And the answer to that is that we're looking for maximum revenue. There are other things going on in real time that could change that dispatch. Transmission constraints, other things that can muddy the waters when we're trying to figure out what's the maximum revenue the resource could have gotten. So that's why we're going to calculate a counterfactual with the hold. Now, expect it to be very close to what happens in real time, but it's possible it might be a little different. And then this counterfactual shows us the dispatch without the hold. So each of these areas has the same column headers. So first we have the economic dispatch. Notice it's NA until the hold ED actually begins in interval 10. The economic dispatch is, in this case, is very simply the intersection of that resource-specific LMP to the real-time bid curve. So the $70 corresponds to the 40 megawatts. So the economic dispatch is 40 megawatts. Now here we have what the ED impact is going to be. In this case, with the hold, the impact is go to zero and stay at zero. Don't discharge. We're also keeping track of the state of charge. Now, the real-time state of charge that's used as, I don't know if I'd call it an initial condition, but the state of charge that's used as the initial input to the counterfactual calculation is the real-time state of charge calculated by the RTD market. It should be very, very close to however the state of charge is tracked. Sorry, I don't know if that's meter data or not, but in any case, it should be very close to what actually is in real time. But then from interval 10 until the end of the day, these state of charge values are completely calculated, and there is no more input from the real-time market as to the state of charge values. So when we're talking about the counterfactual with the hold, the state of charge is going to stay the same because there's no dispatch going on because of the hold. Let's switch over to this side, though. On this side, we have the same economic dispatch. Now, if I was redesigning this workbook, I would combine column K and column E because they're always going to be the same, but I didn't realize that until later. So the economic dispatch is still 40. Now the counterfactual without the hold has no impact from the hold, right? We're looking at this as if the hold ED didn't exist. Oh no, did I just find a mistake? No. I think this state of charge right here is wrong. This 300 is correct, but then this 300 should be less the effective dispatch. I'll have to fix that. All right. So the state of charge is calculated going forward. There's no impact from the hold. So the dispatch megawatt, some people call it final dispatch, effective dispatch, whatever you want to call it. The dispatch under this counterfactual without the hold would be the 40. Now the revenue is simply the 40 megawatt hour dispatch divided by 12 times that real-time price. So this interval is one entire calculation. Here it is with the hold, here it is without the hold. And with the hold, there's no revenue, but without the hold, there would have been some revenue based on the real-time price. Okay, let me pause and make sure that I've got everyone with me before I continue. Are there any questions so far about what I've gone over?
Monique, I'm looking to see if I see any hands raised for you, and I currently do not see any, nor do I see any questions in the chat.
Thank you for checking. All right, continuing on. In the next hour, so here's hour 13. The hold is still in place. Now, in this example, I am purposely making there be high prices during the hold ED. So see how the prices jump up? And ultimately, the revenue is jumping up as well. Let's take interval 9, for example. So that's a nice high price of $400. The economic dispatch is 75 because that's their top dispatch based on their bid curve. If they've been if they've been dispatching all along, their state of charge would be decreasing by this much. Here's their revenue by interval. In this interval, $2,500. And for this hour, there's a significant revenue difference. $17,489 could have been gained by discharging during these high prices. Moving along, similar activity in hour 14. Now, hour 15 is, oh, look at that, another mistake. Oh, sorry. It's so hard to get all of these little formulas right. All right, I'll fix that one as well. So here in hour 15, now in both counterfactuals, the dispatch, the resource is free to dispatch. So why even bother checking the rest of the day, right? Isn't it clear that the revenue is going to be the same in each hour? I mean, if the economic dispatches are the same and the dispatches are the same, the revenue is going to be the same. Yes, that is true for R15, but then look what happens. Because in the counterfactual, without the hold, the resource was allowed to dispatch earlier, then in this case, the resource runs to zero sooner than it would otherwise. That's why that state of charge is so important to track. So down here, yeah, here it is. In hour 18, let's pay attention to hour 18, interval 12. So here we have another high price. The economic dispatch is 75. Now, in the first counterfactual, there's enough stated charge to dispatch the resource to 75, so some revenue is earned, or could have been earned. But without the hold, the stated charge has run out by now. So there's not enough stated charge to actually dispatch the resource. And look at that, another mistake. The dispatch here should be 0. Okay, I have to check that. Okay, that's embarrassing to find mistakes like that when I'm demonstrating it to you guys. I'm so sorry. I will fix those though and get another version published out. I want to point out in here somewhere, sorry, I have to find it. I've got the resource charging. Yeah, here we go. All right. In hour 17, I don't know what's going on this day. We have high prices and negative prices, but in hour 17, I created some negative prices to show that when warranted economically, the counterfactual calculations will have the resource charge and increase the stated charge accordingly. But why is my revenue not working? I have a revenue issue here. All right, I'll have to look at that as well. Then at the end of the day, let's look at what happens at the end of the day. So $37,510 is our total revenue with the hold. Without the hold, $46,806. The difference is positive and becomes our final uplift amount. If the difference were the other way around, the final uplift would be 0. So if we found that the resource could get more revenue with the hold than without, we're not going to claw back any money. There just won't be any uplift. Okay, questions on that so far?
Monique, so I'm going to look again to see if I see any hands raised. And I do not at this time. Additionally, I do not see any questions in the chat just yet.
All right, I'm going to move off.
Oops, so sorry. I did just see one hand raised from Nuri. So you can come off mute and ask your question.
Monique, this is Nuri. So basically, we need to measure the loss opportunity for the storage resource for the entire day. We are measuring this right now. What it costs the storage resource to lose if we hold it for a period of time. So you're measuring all that for the entire day.
What would cause the resource to lose revenue if we hold it?
Yes, for the entire day. You're doing the entire day, right?
I'm doing it, we're doing the counterfactual calculation from the start of a hold ED through the end of the day.
Yes, and then what it costs if you we hold you the resource, then you lose the opportunity to be dispatched to charge or discharged, and we're calculating both.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to clarify that. Thank you, Monique.
You're welcome. All right, anything else?
I do not see any hands raised at this time.
All right, so now I'm going to move on to the next example. I thought this one wasn't colorful enough, so I added a few more colors. So this example is using the same resource with the same basic characteristics, but this time I'm adding in a series of real-time limits. And let's talk about those. So real-time operating limits low and high. So it can discharge up to 75 and charge up to minus 75. These are the stated charge limits. And this is our market energy capacity. This is the low limit, and this is the high limit. So market energy capacity is coming from our commodity allocation. But I don't want to complicate things too much by going to those formulas. Instead, this is really taking into account the ancillary services. So ultimately, it also takes into account economic and operating limits. These limits will never be greater than our operating limits. But this takes into account if the resource has a few megawatts of spin or non-spin. It will also take into account regulation limits. It won't necessarily, let's see. Yeah, it takes into account the regulation limits, but often that is already accounted for in economic bids. So that's a complicated way of saying that our dispatches for these counterfactual calculations are going to be limited by all of these factors, including the market energy capacity, low and high limits. Questions on this before I go on? Because I do have the BPM appendix up. I could go through that. I'm just not sure if it's warranted here, so please let me know. All right, I'm going to keep going on then. So what I've done in this example is I've tried to show in different hours how different limits can impact the calculations. So in this hour, for example, in interval 4, the price is high, it's $130. So the economic dispatch is 75 megawatts. Now, because this is during the hold, the dispatch on this side is going to be 0 to represent that this resource has the hold. But over here, the dispatch is going to be 70. The economic dispatch is 75, but the market energy capacity limit right here is limiting the actual dispatch to 70. Maybe the resource has 5 megawatts of spinning reserve capacity. We don't want to be dispatching the resource into that area. The market wouldn't dispatch the resource in there unless the market was converting the AS into energy. So that will, of course, have an impact on the revenue that's calculated for this hour. So that's one example. Another example here, in this case, I've changed the state of charge limit from 300 to 200. Now, I don't know if that kind of abrupt change would actually happen in real time, but from a mathematical perspective, I want to show you the impact. And believe in this example, none of the dispatches are actually being changed because of this state of charge. So all of these dispatches here, we can do this with the current state of charge value. But in the next hour, when the state of charge limit goes back to 300, we don't just change this by another 100. That's only going to change if the resource is charging. Once the state of charge is calculated to be lower based on the limits, it can't just jump back up. So now this limit here is going to limit the state of charge that's available for the rest of the calculation for the rest of the day. Over here, I've done a demonstration of, again, how the MEC limits can limit the dispatches. So the economic dispatch in these intervals is 75 megawatt hours, but the high limit is limiting that amount. So the final dispatches are impacted. And what did I do here? Looks like I did another example of a MEC limit. Did I do an operating limit? Looks like, oh, I'm sorry. I did do an operating limit change right here. Okay, so what I was trying to demonstrate here is that not only do we have a change in the real-time operating limit, but because the operating limit goes down, then our MEC limit high goes down as well. So in this case, we have 10 megawatts of AS. So what used to be 65 is now 55. I'm trying to think. I don't think you're ever going to, I don't think you're ever going to see it where the MEC limit is higher than the operating limit because it takes it into account. So it's more likely you'd see this scenario where you'll see the operating limit drop and then the MEC limit go down as well. So that example is intended to show you different ways that the dispatch can be impacted by these real-time limits. And in this case, again, we have an uplift at the end of the day. So questions on that before I go to my last example?
I did see a question be put in the chat by Jay. It's the submitted bid curves that go into the counterfactual are a function of actual SOC values. How do you square that?
Look, the submitted bid curve and the real-time SOC values?
Yes, I said yeah.
I'm not sure that I understand the question. Would you mind elaborating a little bit, Jay?
Hello, this is Jaron from Nebraska. Yeah, right. So you're assuming in your case that the bid curve aesthetic applies to all hours or remaining hours of the day. However, when a resource submit curves, it would be based on its SOC value, which would be the actual or the value assuming the hold. But then you calculate the counterfactual with those same curves. So how do you factor in the fact that curves are a function of SOC?
Oh, interesting. Okay. So first of all, in these examples, I'm using just one final bid. but we would be using the bids that are specific for each hour. So the market participant would be submitting bids through the day, through the regular timelines and such, and we would be using those actual bids. Now, I am not familiar with the idea of the final bid curve being created as a function of actual state of charge.
No, but
I don't know if that.
The resource would have submitted different bids under the premise that there was no hold, right? So without the hold, the bid curve would look different than with the hold. So.
All right. I'm not really sure how to answer that. Michael, is that something that you can address?
So yeah, let me understand the question too. Are you, if you get a hold ED and you're holding and your bidding folks are still bidding, are you saying that bidding behavior would change? I just don't understand the question.
Well, if you go back to your SOC paths, right, they're vastly different. So let's say you're under in the counterfactual case, you would have discharged earlier than you would have under the hold. But that would be calculated of the same bid curve. That, you know what I mean? It's like your bid curve would have been different depending on your SOC, and then especially in the hold. So yeah, to me, it doesn't make sense to use the same bid curve as a counterfactual, unless we can submit a bid curve that would have applied under a different SOC, right?
So I think I heard that, you know, each hour bid curves are used, and I think in answer to your question, as you see your SOC is changing, your bidding folks would take that into account, and are completely, you know, welcome to do so.
Okay. Yeah, I think I know how we would handle it, but for example, we wouldn't know how long the hold would last, right? So.
Oh, so you would, and now I can't promise this, but the intention of the hold is, you know, again, in that rare but real high stress situation, and suppose it's from, you know, 1700 to 1900, the ED will have an end time.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah. So the path, so to speak, is confirmed, right? So the hold will have an end time. So we'll actually know the exact path. Okay, great. Okay, that basically solves some of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, let me give you a little more information in that graphic. Remember we saw earlier where it kind of you charge, hold, and dispatch. It would typically look like two EDs where at first if we'd say, okay, let's charge up as fast as possible that, you know, your system, you know, physical resource characteristics can handle, and then hold you there until we need you. So each of those, that's two different exceptional dispatches. One is to charge as fast as you can, one is to hold. So you'll see those explicitly.
With an end time, right?
Both with end times, correct.
Perfect. Okay, thank
you. I also see a hand raised from Alva. So Alva, you can come off mute and ask your question.
Monique, thank you for these examples. I wanted to basically ask the same question, but in a more just general IT sense, just to confirm. And I think I heard, I just want to make sure I heard. So basically, we might be putting in different bid curves for every hour on a resource in real time. And that might happen automatically, or it might happen because we make decisions. When you look at this counterfactual, you're going to use the binding real-time bid curve for each hour in doing the end-of-day calculation. So whatever the motivation might have been for somebody to put in a bid, whether it's they're managing their state of charge or they see something happening, in terms of like trying to duplicate your calculation, if we use the binding bid curve for each hour, that would allow us to replicate this calculation. Am I right in thinking that?
That's correct. And just to put a little more language around it, the real-time bid curve that we're using is what we call your clean bid that comes out of Cyber.
Right. Okay.
But any applicable mitigation that happens in the real-time market runs will be applied. So we call that a final bid, that binding bid curve. I think we're talking about the same thing.
Okay, that's good, but that's helpful. So once you've actually applied mitigation, if anything, but it will be, so as an example, it will capture anything that you do in response to the exceptional dispatch or for any other reason. It will just use that as the baseline for this counterfactual. Okay, that makes it clear to me. The other thing I wanted to ask about was, you have presented this as and I think this is just confirming, because I think you said this once before, but I want to confirm. So in actual real-time dispatch, the logic is not exactly the same as you're presenting here, right? I mean, in other words, somebody, as we were talking about earlier in another context, if the real-time dispatch sees a higher price later in the hour, it might hold back discharge, even though it's in the money in the current interval. But your approach here is to say, if there's a dispatch in the money, that will be considered to be what the resource would have done. And so even if you run out of charge in the real-time dispatch before that higher valued hour later, you might get lower revenues because of the fact that this dispatch is not exactly the same thing as the true real-time dispatch. Is that a correct characterization of this calculation?
Yes.
Okay. And the logic of what you're doing here, is this an approximation, or would you say that, aside from like errors you might have made because of typos, is this the exact logic that will be used in the settlements code? In other words, we can look at this and we can do a shadowing of the counterfactual revenues and really be able to see exactly what we got in our settlements. Is that a fair statement?
I'd say that we're about 95% there. There's one variable that I haven't included, and that's the efficiency factor for the charging. I've made an assumption of a factor of 1. But the
right. So that would just be a change in the way you calculated the state charge, though, right? You just the efficiency factor. Okay.
Right.
All right. That's great. So this is what it will be. There may be minor disagreements between this dispatch and what might really have happened, but this is certainly going to cover the kinds of situations you've talked about, and it will be accurate for us to use this as our calculator, essentially. Thank you very much, Monique.
That's my intent, correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
I do not see any other hands raised at this time, nor do I see any questions in the chat.
I'm just doing a time check. I have enough time to go for another example, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I was doing testing in one of our non-prod environments, and this environment is, doesn't have particularly great prices or anything, and it had super negative prices. And my calculation ended up with these huge revenue amounts. And I thought, what is going on? And then I realized, of course, when you have these extremely low prices, then batteries want to be charging, right? And that's how those bid curves are constructed. So in this case, check out this hour 13. I found this very interesting. With these low prices during the hold, if the resource didn't have the hold, then of course it would be charging. And the charging times the negative price becomes revenue. So this hour with all this charging actually increases the revenue. There's nothing else special about this example. I just wanted to have a chance to go over that particular item.
Monique, it's Michael. On this one, I think it's good to show that the calculation can go each way. But in kind of thinking about when we would actually be doing this on high stress, high load days, I doubt the prices are going to look like that. They're going to be, 300, 600, 900. They're going to be high prices.
So thinking about along those lines, and this is something that we talked about, I do want to do two more examples. I want to do an example with trade date 9/6 of last year, just to have those prices and bid curves that are reasonable for that day, just to show what that would look like. And then I also want to show an example, which is actually going to be a lot more common, where there is no uplift. Because the intent here is that we're going to be charging the batteries when the prices are lower. We'll be holding them when the prices are mid-level, when the demand is mid-level, and dispatching them when the prices and the demand is high. If all of that works as expected, then there is no increased revenue without the hold. Then the counterfactual with the hold does give the higher revenue amount, and there is no uplift. The uplift only happens when the prices do something odd, like have very high or very low prices during hold, for example. So that was the end of what I wanted to show you on the current examples. Any other questions before I hand it back to Cindy?
I do see a couple of hands raised. The first hand I saw go up is Alva. So you can come off mute and ask your question, please.
Yeah, your example there with the negative prices is really interesting, Monique. I'm just curious if because this would play into also, we had some discussion about this where we were thinking that in a sense, the hold state of charge is the equivalent of the minimum state of charge constraint. But it's not really entirely, because what you're showing here is that if you had an incentive to charge and you did charge, you would be deviating from the exceptional dispatch. And I'm curious as to whether you could also, in looking at your example, think about what would the consequence be if somebody sees those negative prices and actually does charge. In other words, they don't respect the exceptional dispatch in that hour. In general, you're doing what the system actually wants, in a sense, because the reason the operator's calling for the hold is to have enough to generate with later, to discharge with, and yet here you're being prevented from charging further. And if you then said, well, heck with it, I'm going to charge anyway, what are is that a penalty situation, and what would the penalties be?
So the penalty situation, there's nothing that changes in this calculation based on the resource actually does, whether the resource actually holds or not. So nothing in this calculation changes. But of course, of the uninstructed imbalanced energy in settlements, and then possible net deviation and allocations associated with that. But that's an area that I'm not that familiar with. I just know about that in general.
And just thinking about it conceptually, what I would see is you could, and by the way, I don't necessarily agree with Michael that this couldn't happen even on a stress day because of the solar excess in the earlier parts of the whole period. But you could have a situation where you would get revenues from the counterfactual, because this doesn't regard what you actually did. If you happen to charge you could get you would get since it's imbalance, you would get the revenues from your imbalance from charging, also doubling the payment, and then there'd be whatever else would be involved, whether it's a clawback or whatever that would say you did not obey the exceptional dispatch during these intervals, and therefore there's going to be some clawback. But trying to understand what that is would determine whether, because all the incentives here would, from what you just said, would be charge, because you're going to get paid for charging. You're going to get paid for the charging anyway because the prices are negative. And then in addition to that, there's a possibility you'll get counterfactual revenues in any case.
Mm-hmm. I see your point.
And Michael, to add to that, I mean, the charge will then, again, the likely scenario will then have you at a good charge, 85, 75, a high level of charge, probably at the peak, at the highest point of the day where you want to be dispatched.
Right.
And there's one other thought I heard you say, this is kind of like a replacement of the minimum SOC. As you know, that rolls off at the end of this month, September 30th. The tariff authority for us to use that goes away. So this is actually, I think, a better way in using the exceptional dispatch, tool and settlements to achieve the same thing. So, thanks.
Yeah, it sounds. Thank you, Michael. And I think that we don't. I'm assuming that the operators have a good tool for deciding which resources to put the hold on. I think you're right. Thank you.
Yes, and I do want to add on that. We do have a tool that as you can imagine, looks at all SOCs currently, and would not pick a bad candidate for an ED. Obviously, if you're in good charge, state of charge, wouldn't do it. If it's too early to do an ED, it's early in the morning, that's not appropriate to do. So the tool tells the operators those type of things.
Thanks, Michael.
I think there was another question, right?
Yep. Jay has his hand up as well. So you can come off mute and ask your question.
Thank you. It's Jerome from Nebraska. So the other question I had, two questions, but do you have an example where your real-time price during the hold exceeded the offer cap?
Where the real-time price exceeded what?
The offer cap of, let's say, $1,000. So you basically, as you said, it would intersect up the curve. You would basically be dispatched in the counterfactual. But then maybe prices could go much higher later on, and then so in the counterfactual, you'll be out of charge, state of charge, right? So you'll be actually depleted. And in the counterfactual, you'd be discharged of the offer cap.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing all of the words that you're saying, but it sounds like you're looking for an example where we have prices that exceed the cap, go above $1,000.
Right.
And so that the counterfactual without the hold would show the resource being dispatched and kind of like run out the state of charge?
Exactly. And then later in the day, prices could go up to, I don't know, $1,500, $2,000. The counterfactual wouldn't show the revenue.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that you said. Did someone catch
Later
that?
on, prices go far above, and you would not be able to discharge in the counterfactual. So maybe you have an example like that. I mean, it's an edge case, but it would be nice to have an example.
Yeah, okay. I see what you're saying. So the counterfactual has the state of charge run to zero and then have high prices later where the counterfactual can't dispatch.
Correct.
The counterfactual without the hold can't dispatch, but the counterfactual with the hold can dispatch.
That's right.
Sure, I'll do an example like that.
And then the other question I had was so this is basically a 5-minute, so the counterfactual is a physical, but then you could have an imbalance based on the 15-minute market rate. So whatever you do in 15 minutes, that's basically becomes an imbalance with your hold until the hold ends, right? This is
So the
strictly
counterfactual is.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So this is strictly your RTD settlement, right?
Yes, it's strictly RTD. We're not bringing the RTPD into account.
Okay, thank you.
Now, to be clear, expected energy settlement is still happening at the same time as this counterfactual calculation is going on. Those two functions are completely separate. The only change or impact is that the hold ED will not be considered when we're calculating the expected energy. The charge ED will be considered just how it is right now. The hold ED will not be counted in expected energy. It will only be counted in its counterfactual calculation. Were there other questions?
I do not see any other hands raised at this time. Additionally, I do not see any questions in the chat.
Great. Monique, thank you so much for taking the time to go over these examples. And as you mentioned, you're going to update them and we'll put them out there for everybody. Oh, I do see a question that just came in, and it's in the chat. It said, would an exceptional dispatch instruction to charge override the grid charging indicator and force the storage resource to charge even if its PGA explicitly states that it is physically incapable of grid charging?
So, yeah, that's a good question. And your resource would not be a candidate, and the operator would not create EDs in that case.
Thank you. Okay, I am going back to the presentation here. Let me just make sure I get myself set up. Oh, I can see the chat questions, and then we'll continue on. All right. Once again, we just have some more slides on this, and then we're going to go to the simulation scenarios. All right. Don't know what that's for. Here we go. So these are the inputs to the lost opportunity cost. I believe Monique provided me with this. So these are just the items in the BRS, where you would find them, and some notes. Monique also provided me, and I'll let her jump in if she wants, about some suggestions for the settlement market sim scenario 1. We're going to go over market sim scenario 1 in just a couple minutes, and that scenario is the one where we are testing this hold SOC and the settlement. To put words in Monique's mouth, she suggested that you want to submit day-ahead energy bids, submit ancillary service bids if you have ancillary services, and also submit real-time charge limits in cyber, and also try out using those real-time operating limits in OMS. Also, you're going to want to bid high at the hold, and I have a note on this later, and bid lower. Bid high during the hold and low after the hold. That's going to help create these scenarios. The structured simulation trade dates are on September 19th, 20th, and 21st. I don't know the hours yet, but hopefully on the next Market Sim call, which is tomorrow, we should be able to provide you with that. Okay. We will continue on to the next slide, which are the new reports that we have. This new report is in CMRI. It is the Exceptional Dispatch Hold State of Charge. You can see that it has your filters at the top. It's going to have your ED start and end times. And so those will be in 5-minute increments, and it will be every 5 minutes, regardless of whether you have a hold ED or not. It's going to have your SCID, your resource ID, and on this, I blurred out the proprietary information, but I did leave the 4 on the end of the resource ID, just so you know that we're, in this example, this is the same resource ID throughout this entire grid. So you can see that there were some time periods or intervals that had no hold ED, and then at about, at 1900 to 1905, the hold ED was applicable. So that would be the start of your evaluation period, and it would go to the end of the day. It also shows that hold ED instruction, in this case, the 0 megawatts, and the 2 counterfactual megawatt amounts for the settlement. So we've got the counterfactual dispatch with the hold and the counterfactual dispatch without the hold, as well as the revenue amount. So that is the new report that is going to be in CMRI. Additionally, here's the RUG slide, which includes the API information for this report. Additionally, there is going to be a new reason codes in the OASIS report. This OASIS report, the the operator initiated commitment report, which is in the Energy tab under System, currently has the reasons, and we're going to be adding these 2 new ones, the SOC hold and the SOC charge. With this report, if you try to access it, it doesn't come up on the OASIS screen as a grid. You're going to download it as XML or CSV. Again, this is not a new report. We're just adding the reason codes on. The RUG slide for that, again, shows the UI and the API, which already exist, and the new reason codes that we're applying. Questions? Any additional or final questions with regard to the SOC hold? And of course, any of the questions that we did not answer yet, I'm going to gather them all. I'm going to get answers to everything, and I will send them out to all of you. So, do we have any questions?
I currently do not see any hands raised, nor do I see any additional questions in the chat.
Okay. Then we're going to move on to the market simulation scenarios, and there are 2 of them. So we're going to talk about the overall logistics first, and then we're going to go over the scenarios. So to participate in the market sim, please register as soon as possible. The registration period is over, but if you are interested, please register to participate in Market Sim at caiso.com as soon as possible. I highly encourage you to participate in the Market Sim and also attend the Market Sim forums to stay informed of all activities related to the Market Sim, not just this particular initiative. Those calls are on Monday and Thursday, and they are at 2 p.m. If you have questions about anything in the Market Sim, you can submit them via City. You can see I have the functional environment listed up above there on the right, and you would select the Market Simulation Fall 2023 for questions regarding the Market Sim. We have also, and then it's not on here, added some additional functional environments if you have questions about releases and things like that. So, but for the Market Sim, you would use this functional environment. So let's look at the first scenario. So the operators are going to issue exceptional dispatches for 2 storage resources to hold SOC, and then issue an ED for another resource with a hold to move SOC. And market participants should see the different ED types and make sure they're settled properly. So when a resource receives that hold SOC ED, it's anticipated that there's going to be settlements for both the payment and the cost. And I have those charge codes there. And also there could be an additional, depending on if there's additional dollars to allocate, could be in that excess cost neutrality application as well. Any questions about this particular scenario before we move on to the next one?
I'm looking, and I currently do not see any hands raised or any questions in the chat.
Okay, and as I mentioned, we will have more information about the hours in the next Market Sim call. So moving on to the second scenario, and this one is unstructured. You're going to verify the hourly do not charge from the grid bidding functionality for standalone or sub-ACC constraints. So market participants, we're going to want you to submit the bids with the hourly attribute to not charge from the grid in the real-time market, and submit those bids for all your resources behind the ACC. For storage resources, you're going to want to definitely submit economic bids to charge and or discharge. And the expected outcome, of course, will be that we will not be charging from the grid, and the market will enforce the withdrawal line of 0 for that ACC. What questions are there on this scenario?
I'm looking again, and I currently do not see any hands raised, nor do I see any questions in the chat.
Thank you, Dottie. All right, so we're just going to wrap it up here with a recap of what you as a market participant need to do. And first, I would suggest that you participate in the market simulation and try these things out, and participate in the market sim forums, because you'll get the most updated information about what's going on, timing, hours, and so forth with regard to the market simulation. I'd also suggest that you participate in our release user group, also known as our RUG meetings, because we also have updated information that we provide in those meetings. If you have a pseudo-tied co-located resource and would like to have an ACC, work with our ISO contracts department to update your PGA, and of course make sure that the master file is updated. And if you have a co-located resource and wish to opt out of charging from the grid, again, you would work with our contracts department to update that PGA and use the off-grid charging indicator on the hourly tab in Cyber to indicate if a resource, you don't want your resource to charge from the grid. Again, that can be turned on and off hourly and between the day ahead and real time. Also, you're going to want to validate those hold SOC settlements, of course. That is all I have for now. This is what you need to do, and what I need to do is to provide you with an update, updated presentation, and answers to your questions. So with that, I'm going to open it up one more time for questions, and then we will end our session.
Perfect. So I am looking currently. I do not see any hands raised, nor do I see any. Oh, I see one hand. Sean, you can come off mute and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. Can you just remind, what do we need to do with the PGA for the non-pseudo-tie co-located?
If you are not already a pseudotide resource, or you do not have an co-located resources now. If you do have a co-located resource and a pseudotide, you want to make sure that on the PGA that you have that ACC identified. There's a slide early in the question that kind of shows an example of that.
Thank you. So it's just to make sure that the ACC is showing on the PGA.
Right.
Thank you so much. Great.
Other questions?
Besides that, I do not see any hands raised currently, nor do I see any additional questions in the chat.
All right. Well, I thank you for your participation. If you have questions about things in this training, please send them to customer readiness. If you have other questions about your specific concerns or about the release or about the policy related to this, we have other means for that, and you'll get a faster answer. You can submit them, submit a city ticket, which you can see in the bottom there is in the ISO markup participant portal. If you don't have access to the markup participant portal to create that city ticket, you can go to the ISO website and you can choose the Contact Us button up at the top there. And when you put in your question, that will create a city ticket. So either way, you can get your city ticket in there and get your questions answered. And with that, I thank you all for participating. I hope you found value in this, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Cynthia.